You ready?
Ready.
Okay, so this is episode 1, take 1 of the Horizon story, day 1 of the first episode. Okay?
Got it.
Okay, here we go. Coming out in 3, 2.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You'll meet that gentleman a little bit later. His name is Na'alehu. My name is Norma, and this is the first episode of a new podcast called The Horizon Story. We'll talk later about why it's called The Horizon Story, but for now, what is this about? Why are we doing this? For a while, there's a question about how we make sense of things. Every day, things are unfolding, they're collapsing, they're pulling apart. How do we make sense of the stuckness where we can't actually move things forward, but the things we don't want to move forward move very quickly? And all along the way, collapse happening all along the way, all at the same time. How do we make sense of these things? What are we to call normal and what is abnormal? What is usual and what is unusual? Just a little bit ago, Hawaii went through a whole series of storm fronts. It's called the Kona low. Kona because it comes from the south and from that place in Hawaii that we know as Kona. And it's a huge, humid front that rolls on for days and days. We can feel and we can see it coming. The low-lying clouds, the way in which all of the pressure just builds up and builds up. And we are at risk if we don't pay attention to it. It's really important that we pay attention as humans as it happens. But is it an emergency that is not going to happen again? Or is this about something that we can count on now? Maybe not every year, but more frequently. This thing called climate change that has moved throughout the world now for more than a few generations. There's a renowned Polynesian navigator who said he doesn't think about climate change because climate changes all the time. And what that means is he's been watching it. He has his eyes wide open. He's been observing the phenomena of the change, the many changes. Not only the climate is shifting these days, we'd say in some ways it's just the icing on the cake, all throughout the world, every single day. Eyes wide open. This first episode is going to be about you getting a sense of how it is that I am thinking, how I'm looking, how I'm observing all of this change as it has occurred before we were born, as it is occurring right before our eyes. In many ways, it's more than an explainer. It's something that's called a decoder ring. Now, some of you know what a decoder ring is, but you'd have to be of a certain age. But I'm sure for the rest of you, if you went on Wikipedia, you could find some smart definitions of it. Decoder ring is definitely a mechanical thing. It's not metaphysical or magic or AI or any of those kinds of things. It's like if you turn it a particular way, it'll tell you what it is that's happening because it's giving you the code. And that's what this first episode is. What will give you a seat in my seat, eyes in the same way that I'm looking at things, the same kind of hearing that I'm hearing, and not only myself, but a growing community of people throughout the world who are looking at this moment and saying, What are we to make of it? What is happening? And as it unfolds, are we going to be the people who will be able to step up into this moment? That would be the only reason why we would do this, the only reason why we would be here. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Across the many generations of folks who are in this room, hearing this now, let's get to work. Hi, aloha, welcome back. Welcome back to the first episode of the Horizon Story. What does it mean to have our eyes wide open? In the Olelo Hawaii, the native Hawaiian language, there's a word called maka'ala, eyes wide open. It's not only about looking at things, it's about, are we observing whatever is occurring and just being still in ourselves and not making a judgment about things too quickly? Do we have our eyes wide open? This is particularly important when no thing works. And so, what does it mean to have our eyes wide open, maka'ala, when no thing appears to be working, at least working well? It's working in some way, but it doesn't appear to be working well. So as we watch this unfolding change, what are we to make of it? Here I would invite you to take a master strategist view, which is to say that when we're down there in the weeds, or we're walking on the sand, or we have our feet in the soil, when we're focusing on things too closely, then we can't have the view plane of a master strategist. Climb up into the hills a bit and look at the surrounding terrain, not only what's in front of you, but from side to side, from front to back, up and down. Just take a look at what's unfolding. You know, as it turns out, there's a lot for us to look at, a lot for us to watch. We are living in the weather. We're living in a moment in which day to day, you could have snow piling up for 24, 30 inches. And then just a few miles away, there'll be hail. And then down the street, they'll be looking forward to a summer in the middle of February. What are we to make of that? All of these shifts. What do we make of the fact that the climate is upon us and therefore many costs accumulated around that? Now, in Hawaii, we don't pay that much attention to that. But that's a good thing for me to understand. Sitting from the vantage point of Hawaii, where the weather is mostly the same for most of the year, we may not pay attention to the fact that there are whole parts of the world, whole parts of many countries that would have to heat their houses, right? That would have to have air conditioning during the summer. That those would be costs, and those costs would be about whether or not there's adequate fuel. Right now, fuel is getting short. And I can confidently say because what they're talking about is that the war is, even if it stops, even by the time you see this podcast, if the war has stopped, it doesn't mean that the shortage is going to somehow disappear, that we will somehow, the fuel prices will go down and that there be available fuel in all the parts of Asia that are now short. The parts of Asia that are now at 4 days a week is what they work because there isn't enough fuel to go around. Or places where they're worried that there won't be enough fuel that will take care of the summer bump of traffic. You know, the people who go on vacation during the summer. People who come to the place like Hawaii, will there be fewer flights? Likely. They say that in a few weeks of the time that we are on this broadcast, that what will happen is that in Europe, that they begin to have severe shortages of jet fuel. And on the West Coast of the United States, as it turns out, the same thing. Because of changes that were made decades ago, they pile up. We are indeed an interconnected world now. And what that means is that a situation, a war, a closing of a strait that happens to be strategic for many peoples and many countries, that a generations-long fight between peoples would erupt at a singular moment in which it would count. It would count and ripple across the world. This only adding to the many things that we may need to watch for, pay attention to. Migration. Even if the rules of a country, even if the politics of a country would mean that it would be not good for people to travel to that place, it may not be deemed as something that a peoples may want, that it doesn't mean that the reasons for that migration would have stopped. There would still be this way in which, in all of these places around the world, people would feel that they need to migrate. They would have to go somewhere because of warfare or climate shifts or weather conditions or civil disruption or drought or food shortages, or all of the many things in which, in their place, it is not becoming more habitable, it's becoming less habitable. There's more possibility in other places, less possibility where you live. I'm accustomed to that notion. Here in Hawaii, we've had people who've had to migrate out of Hawaii. They would feel that they would need to go to places where they could earn more money or where housing would not be as expensive, where their children might have a better shot at it. And they may feel that they need to move. And they would feel that urge very strongly, and there would be this way in which people would migrate out of Hawaii. They wouldn't necessarily be fleeing for their lives, as many people are now fleeing for their lives from one continent to another. But still, that notion that we would have to migrate in order to live a better life, it's a thing. It's been happening for a long time. But now there are massive strands of migration moving across that globe, some because of war, some because of the weather, some because the conditions in that place have just gotten worse and worse and worse. And all of this begins to shift the world order itself, the way in which countries think of themselves, the way in which countries think of order, the way in countries think about who they are, their identity, what they believe in, what they hope for, what they can count on next year, what their children can count on, whether their grandchildren will be able to live in a better place, a better time than they will be, or something that is less useful less hopeful. And all of this will create a certain amount of turmoil, even when people desire the exact opposite. When they desire more stability, there will still be this underlying notion of unrest and all of this unfolding and adding to the change, not the least of which is technology. Now, here I am. I'm sitting in a studio, actually. It's in a studio on a street that I won't name just for the privacy, of the people who live here. From time to time, you might hear a bus go up the street, and someone in the back room will say, "Can we do something about that? Can we actually do something?" No, we can't do anything about that. But you could add technology that would end up taking that particular noise out. But that wouldn't mean that that noise did not exist to begin with. And so there's this way in which technology coming into our lives has both made our lives easier, and they've also deadened our possibility of hearing and experiencing the world just as it is, just as it is. And we have this push and this pushback. We're going to talk a lot more about that, this thing of the emergent technology and what it is that we're to make of it, how we're to think of it, how we think about all of these things, adding on into a phenomena that's accelerating. This acceleration of things that we're feeling is a phenomena that paradoxically, many, many people took more notice of during the pandemic. At that moment, when the entire world almost came to a halt, we began to see what it is that we had been feeling up until that point, because you have a chance to stop. So if you're running, right, you don't notice that you're running. But when you stop running, your heart is beating fast, and you notice that everything around you is moving differently. But is it the things that are moving differently, or is it because you stopped? And it'll take a few moments for you to make sense of that. What has stopped and what keeps on going. And that's the phenomena that almost the entire world felt in that long moment when we were all in quarantine, or portions of the world were in quarantine and portions of the world were trying to bust its way out. And at that moment, we had time. We had time to stop as humans. And at that moment, we understood how quickly the world is moving, accelerating, and in a phenomena that's actually creating energy in its wake. You could call it a slipstream, which we'll talk about more. But it's like this thing that if you are someone who rides a bicycle, for example, right? If you are in a bicycle right behind someone who is on a bicycle, it's actually easier. You slip in that energy wake, in that physical phenomena right behind, this slipstream, this current, and all of this acceleration is creating that. We're caught up in it, not in a web, but in a fast-moving current, just moving along. What are we to make of it? Well, first of all, let's have our eyes wide open, maka'ala. Not trying to make sense of it too quickly, just noticing all the things that are happening in this fast-moving stream of modernity that we are in. Our generation, we are in this moment. Maka'ala, eyes wide open. We'll be back in a few minutes.
What to do when nothing works. With wise and witty prose, Zen master and indigenous strategist Norma Wong reflects on this question and more in her acclaimed first book, When No Thing Works. Norma weaves poetry, storytelling, and meditation, inviting us to imagine a horizon of possibility beyond crisis. Hard copy and audiobook available now. Shop bookshop.com and support your local bookstore.
Aloha, everyone. Welcome back. We're here with my good friend, Na'alehu Anthony, who will be joining us from time to time throughout the podcast. I hope he'll come back often. He has a particular role in the podcast. He's the executive producer, and I'm actually hoping that he'll allow me one question of him, which would be, Lehu, what is an executive producer?
Yes. In the TV world, the executive producer is largely without function, except in this case, I took the executive producer role, one, because we have a number of capable producers on the show, and sometimes I direct, but if I'm in front of the camera, then I can't direct. And so in this case, the EP role is to kind of be able to peer into all the different facets of the production. So everything from the technical half, making sure that the camera setup is correct, using my production experience to do that, and then to oversee like how this podcast could roll out. So everything from the communications of what the podcast is about, all the way through the kind of the granular details of like what we're talking about. To kind of hopefully to start this production in the right way, and then also if I have the EP role, then I can slowly moonwalk my way back to make sure that we make room for others to come in to help to move this along. So it's an opportunity for training as we go.
Okay, well, I'm not going to touch on the moonwalking business, but I do want to thank you for taking on this particular role. And I wanted to let you know, in front of all of the public that is there, that I would not even think about doing this, being on a podcast, if you were not the person who would do this. So thank you so very much.
Well, you're very welcome, and and thank you for that. And that's why, as an executive producer, I fill in at all of these roles. You may or may not see me slating from time to time, and and want to make sure that the content that we're producing is at a level and at a standard that the OEV TV shop holds in their day-to-day activities, but also to make sure that you're comfortable in this role as we contemplate many episodes to bring what you've been talking about in other spaces to this new format. To be able to really meet the level of clarity and specificity at which you bring to every room to this kind of setting, and to do it in a way where the set is just right and the cameras are just right, and so that we can meet you at the level of excellence at which you persist. So thank you.
Well, it seems like a paradox, but I think it's worth noting here. This whole thing about if we're going to have to enter really serious and complex conversation, if we're going to wrestle with things, then a thing that we actually need to do is we need to actually do it in a way in which we feel that we are in a place of ease when we contemplate it. So that feels like a paradox, but it's an important aspect about this. So,
yeah, I mean, I think maybe to close out that part of it, it's like in order to actually do this kind of work, you have to have a team that is all working towards a similar goal. And so we'll meet other team members this season, and when you read the credits, the credits of that team, they're all working towards the same direction. And that's not always the case, but in this instance, we worked really hard at that so that There can be ease in front of the camera in a place that might not be as comfortable for someone like you who is claimed introvert, but also to make sure that that the conditions are right for content like this to reverberate through space and time in the different ways in which we create this kind of content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, one of the roles that Na'alehu is going to have, in addition to being an executive producer, is he's going to come on and he's going to help ask the questions that the answers, as they are revealed, will show different things. And so, you know, I could go on and on and on, but only because, you know, many of my ancestors were people, as you would say, Lehu, people of the long story, right?
That's right.
Okay, so I could sit here and I could just like go on and on and on, valao, valao, valao. But whether or not that would mean that people who are coming along with us, who are sitting in a room listening to this, whether or not they will get the point.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay? So you're going to help me get to the point. And in that inquiring way that is we've become accustomed to with each other.
Right. And thank you for that. And so part of what I was doing as we were shooting the first two parts of this to get to this part of the show was listening very intently to some of the content that you were talking about. And so I have a few questions that I wanted to follow up with you on to help us to understand how this stuff fits together. Okay, this content. And so the first question I have is, you mentioned in the before the break this idea of the slipstream. You used the bike metaphor, being behind somebody riding in front of you, and there's this slipstream. But I think it's much more complex than that. And so I'm wondering, like, I've also heard you talk about the slipstream and this idea of like this fast current. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you can help us to understand how and why the slipstream, that concept of the slipstream, is so important right now.
Okay. So when many things are happening at the same time, right, they create energy. They just create energy. And so as they create the energy, we get like sucked into it. Now, we're all used to this in different ways. So let's think of different examples. So you get onto the freeway. Okay, you drive onto the freeway. And as you drive onto the freeway, there's a difference if it's a time of day when things are moving slowly or a time of day when things are like rushing along.
Right.
And if it's rushing along, if you're going slowly, then you will feel the difference between you, and you'll feel the need actually to move faster. Moving faster actually provides safety, right? If everything is moving fast, if you move fast too, there'll be safety. Okay. Now, I've never been, but you know, there's a part of the world where they do these run of the bulls. Mm-hmm. Okay. And people will actually participate in that run of the bulls, and you'd have this huge, as all of the bulls go down through the city streets, or the streets of towns, actually, not cities. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the humans running in front of them. The question actually, are the bulls running after the humans, running away from the humans, chasing the humans? Or are the humans actually just trying to stay just a little bit ahead of the bulls? Okay, all right. And when you're in an accelerated slipstream, okay, there will be a way in which my guess, if we interviewed the bulls, they wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you which is which. Okay, all right. And so the bulls and the humans basically just form this great movement. If you took your camera, one of your cameras, mm-hmm. and you took it all the way up, and you had an bird's eye view of down, and you couldn't tell whether they were bulls or humans mm-hmm. as they're running along, you would just see this great movement that is occurring. You would be able to sense it. You'd be able to clock it. You know, you'd be able to clock it in terms of how fast it's moving. And you would, even if you're very far away, you would feel the energy of it. Right?
Sure.
So slipstream, right, is a phenomena when many things are happening, or when, let's say, currents in oceans.
Sure.
Okay? The currents in the oceans form a way in which, if you are in that current, you will move along faster, and you cannot move in any direction except in the direction of that current. So those are important aspects.
And so I'm going to get to acceleration in a second, but
Okay.
I wanted to follow up with this idea of slipstream. Why is it important for us to consider that as humanity right now?
Because we're in one.
And where is it taking us?
That is a good question. So I'd say if we do not do anything, in other words, if we don't intervene, interrupt, if we don't try to build a alternative to the slipstream, then I could say that it is leading us to more and more collapse, where more and more things are not going to work.
You're getting ahead of my cue card, though. I got one
okay.
question
All right,
before
all
we
right.
get to
Okay.
collapse.
Okay.
So you had said in the previous block that that technology is part of this idea of acceleration, and I would agree. I would agree. A couple of decades ago, we fractured the news cycle as, and that news cycle has sped up to now where it's just one continuous news cycle that doesn't break at 6 p.m. anymore on the 6 o'clock news or at 10 p.m. It just happens when it happens, right? And so there are announcements all day long as an example of like this acceleration of tech. But why is it important that we think about the acceleration of technology in these two pieces, the slipstream that you just mentioned, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about collapse as well.
Okay. So when technology is, so let's take the fast-moving markets, okay, which is mostly driven by technological assistance. So you have brokers who still do the job of humans in terms of how the market works. Okay, I'm talking about like Wall Street, the Dow, et cetera, the Asian markets. And so you have humans in the mix, but you also have now these technological interfaces that speed up every transaction and that speed up the collapsing of the data to make sense of that data much faster than humans used to.
Sure.
Okay?
Yep.
Right. Now, what that does, apparently, is allow most people to make a lot of money much faster and to lose money a lot faster than ever before in human history. Okay. And now most of that is moving not in accordance with what what's represented about what's happening, but more about the ways in which these technological enhancements allow people to make more money. So it's chasing more money because it can, versus, the stock market is up because of a particular set of news or down because of a particular set of news. That's how we could be slipping into getting mired into a war. And at the same time, people are making a lot of money. It used to be that wasn't proximately what occurred. Okay.
Sure.
But it's technology is by reducing the time in which something happens and you can take an action, by cutting all of that out in between. One of the things it does is it almost does not allow for humans to do something else except that which technology has programmed it to do. Can you make another decision in the in-between moment? There's no in-between moment.
Can you make another decision in the in-between moment? There's no in-between moment. I think that part really resonates with me in the speeding up of how we do many things, and whether or not there's a moment to breathe in between those actions. So thank you for that. And I think that also leads into your example about what's accelerating and how markets are moving. Really points to the kinds of, both within the country as well as within the globe, the kinds of examples we have of collapse. We are seeing collapse in the effectiveness of bureaucracies.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing collapse in other countries. We're certainly seeing collapse in the way we treat each other in these relationships globally.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, like, how do you see the role of collapse both nationally and internationally playing into this larger idea of speeding up and acceleration and being in this quickly moving slipstream?
Well, there's technology and then there's human reaction. Okay. And so as we see things fall, we actually, well, first of all, do we like when things fall? And I would say right now, some people actually like when things fall. And some people don't want things to fall. And so you have this action reaction
Mm-hmm.
that is going on.
Right.
And in that action reaction, that you are not only in relationship to the things that fall, but you're in relationship to each other. Can we stop the people who are making things fall? You're not necessarily actually keeping them from falling. You're just trying to stop the people who are trying to make it fall. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the people who want it to fall. And what you're doing is you're trying to stop the people who are building things. Now, at that moment, right, if you are successful, then those things don't get built. Okay? And so we have this human action reaction that is playing into all of this. And together, right, nothing has a chance to really take hold. Okay?
Right.
It's like that which you might build, as fast as you're building it, someone is coming from behind and is trying to erode it. Okay. And when they erode it, they'll use the technology of rapid communication to spread both facts and facts that are not quite facts and messages, right? And that essentially will have people either pay attention or not pay attention.
Right.
So you're fiddling with the whole process of human decision making. Okay. And all of this is happening at speed.
Right.
Every single day.
Right. And so the basis, one of the reasons for this podcast is because there's also two books that have come out that have been, widely successful, and they have brought about a number of conversations that I think this is in response to. And your first book, When No Thing Works, there's a question behind that as to why it is that you chose When No Thing Works versus calling it When Nothing Works.
Okay.
And can you talk about the difference between those two concepts, no thing and nothing?
Okay. So that which is collapsing are mostly things. Okay. Rules, laws, processes, institutions, norms, roads, right? The rain falls very heavily and the road starts to collapse. Okay? And so things are beginning to not work and not work at scale. Okay. But they're things. They're things. And so it's not true that nothing works. Why do I say that? Okay. Because when no thing works, when things begin to fall apart, I see people actually arising,
Right.
arriving, deciding to take up the slack, reaching out to each other, feeding each other, keeping each other safe. And so while no thing is working, people are beginning to arise.
That's a really important piece of the puzzle.
Important piece.
Yeah. Since this is my only time in on this show, can I throw a break?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we'll be right back with the Horizon story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In her highly anticipated sequel, Who We Are Becoming Matters, Zen master and indigenous strategist Norma Wong asks, will you choose humanity? Poetic and practical, Norma explores who we can become and how we can evolve, not in spite of, but directly in response to crisis and challenge. Hard copy and audiobook available now. Shop bookshop.com and support your local bookstore.
Okay, friends, let's just take a breath for a moment. I know it's a lot. Right? What we're seeing happening all the time can raise our anxiety level. But what I'm doing here is I'm not giving you details in order to fan the flames of that anxiety. It's actually the reverse. So what we're practicing here is what might be possible if, as humans, with our eyes wide open rather than our eyes closed, that we became more observant and understanding of what's happening in the world. Might that actually give us some agency in terms of how it is that we need to prepare and what we can do next? That's the proposition. And I know it's a lot. Part of the reason why all of this is being front-loaded is that you have a much more granular sense of how it is that I am seeing, and therefore how it is that you might see what is occurring, and that you might begin to normalize your way of observing. And therefore, you would become more like Neo in The Matrix. I hope you saw that movie. And if you didn't, that's your homework. And here I'm talking about the first one. Beyond that, that's your choice, but your homework is to watch the first. And in that, what you saw is Neo, as it became more and more clear to him that there were actually more than one thing that was happening in the universe, and that he could choose which one would be the world that he would hold on to, and which one would be the world that was really just a mirage, something that was real to some people. But if you followed the course of that reality, then all would be lost. So as things become more and more clear, which I hope will be the case for you as we move from one episode to the next, a thing that will arise in you would be the thought, could this possibly be so? And then if it is so, then what? Then so what? What are we to do about it? And that's exactly the inquiry that we want to have. That would be the whole reason to be engaged in any kind of listening tour or conversation with respect to this world as it is collapsing. If we have our eyes wide open, maka'ala, eyes wide open, and we make sense of things, we would understand that we are not only in just a fast-moving stream that is collapsing around us, we are in a moment in which another world can become clear as well, and we can choose. In other words, we can be in the matrix. And so, with apologies to that particular franchise, of which I hold no claim for, no credits with respect to what it is, that that whole notion can then bring us into a different kind of reality. We can know things for what they exactly are. We can understand things for exactly what they are. And we can make choices about the world as we wish it to be, not only the world as it is happening to us. So agency is our game. That's our gain. And that is our goal. So both game, gain, and goal, all in one. Hey, friends. I hope that you had a chance to try that decoder ring on for size and that you're now beginning to get a little bit of sense about how to use it. In our next episode, I'm going to be joined by my good friend Nan Stoops, who will have more to say about all things decoder ring, I'm sure. And we're going to actually enter into the subject matter of origins. Right? The origins of the podcast, the origins of who it is that Nan and I are, the origins of the invitation to you, the origins to this inquiry. Okay? In the worldview of people who are culturally intact, people who are indigenous in nature, origins count. And so therefore, we can't go on and on in this podcast without going back to origins. So that's something to look forward to. And in the meantime, you may want to have a bit of inquiry for yourself. Okay? What brings you to this podcast? What brings you to this inquiry? Mark the moment, because it'll change. I can guarantee you that. Thank you so very much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Horizon Story. The Horizon Story podcast was produced by Sarah Demarest de Rivera and Bryson Ho, hosted and written by me, executive producer Naalehu Anthony, associate producer Scott Nine, featuring Nan Stoops. For Collective Acceleration, Kelly Miller. For OEV TV, Ken Sato, Wesley Kealoha, Courtney Leong, Jeff Lee, and Ivy Lagadlagad. For Pa'akai Communications, Jamila Silver, Diana Han, Pearl Tilley, and Christine Matsuda. Hair and Makeup by Chris Jose. Mahalo to the place of my birth, ancestors, teachers, collaborators, and friends, Rosie Abraham for the support, and Taj James for the encouragement. The Horizon Story is brought to you by OEV TV. Copyright held by Collective Acceleration. Follow us on social at The Horizon Story. Questions to hello@thehorizonstory.com. Visit us where you find your favorite podcasts or at thehorizonstory.com.